Our guest is author Susan Masino, who wrote the book Let There Be Rock, the story of AC/DC. Originally released in 2006, the updated edition released through Omnibus Press in 2020. She's also the author of 2015's AC/DC FAQ, All That's Left to Know About the World's True Rock and Roll Band. Welcome back to the podcast, Susan. How are you?
Oh, I'm great, Eric. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Happy holidays. And did I get those dates correct, right? 2006?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes,
And
you
then
did.
2020 through. I got it right here in front of me. There it is. So, AC/DC, 50 years ago, fall of 1974, Bon Scott and AC/DC joined forces. Hard to believe, 50 years.
I know.
As we know, they only got bigger as the years went on with Bon, culminated with 1979's Highway to Hell. Brian Johnson steps in after the death of Bon in 1980. Back in Black, huge, one of the biggest selling albums in history. You have an interesting history with the band. Talk about how it was a chance assignment to see the band perform that began your journey with the great AC/DC.
Well, I was trying to get my foot in the door at a local paper here in Madison called the Mad City Music Sheet, and I was the only girl at the time, so it wasn't very popular for women to want to write about rock. Um, So I just, did small things for them. And on the afternoon of August 16th, 1977, the same day that Elvis died, I was driving by their offices, and my intuition, which I call it the voice, told me pull over and get an assignment. And at first, I just kind of blew it off because I thought, well, they're not going to give me anything because they haven't so far. And no, I heard it again. Pull over and get an assignment. So I went in to the office, and one of the editors was just hanging up the phone. His name is Gary Summers, and actually he's on Antiques Roadshow now. He
Okay.
does he does a lot of, rock memorabilia
Oh,
and all of
wow.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, he had just hung the phone up and looked at me kind of like, "What do you want?" And I said, "Oh, I was just here to see if there's anything I could help with, or any bands that you needed to review, or anything. I'm up for anything." And he kind of, shrugged his shoulders and he said, "Well, I just got off the phone with Stardate, which was one of the major promoters here in Wisconsin at the time. There were two, Stardate and Landmark, both out of Milwaukee." And he said, "Well, I just got off the phone with Stardate. They have a band downtown tonight at the Stone Hearth, and they need a gopher." And he said, "There's no pay. You probably can get a friend in for free, but they need you down there at 4 o'clock this afternoon and just, help out the promoter." And I was, like, "Aye, aye, sir." I couldn't wait. I was like, that I finally got
This
something.
was your
And
chance.
I know. And little did I know what this was going to do, because I had seen all the big bands throughout my high school years. I'd seen Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, The Who, Cream. I mean, everybody. And so as I was leaving, I turned around and I said, "Oh, by the way, what band is it?" And he again, he kind of said, "I don't know, some band out of Australia called AC/DC." And I thought, and I'd never heard the words before, so I was like, "Oh, okay," and thought nothing of it. They had no airplay, even though they had their fourth album out, Let There Be Rock. The US was not giving them any airplay. And actually, I think Rolling Stone kind of trashed the album, if I remember right. So I had never heard of them. I had never heard a note. And I went down to the club, and right away I was sent out to buy some Blue Nun wine for the lead singer. The band was out to dinner, so they were not there. And they had a three-man road crew. It was $3 to get in. I still have the poster or the
Three
flyer for the
dollars.
show.
Oh, man.
$3. And I had no idea, what I was in for. So they had a little one-page bio. and they were not very pretty looking in these pictures. They they looked a little eh, and and it said, they had just come off a finally they got to the UK and they did a very successful tour over there. And then that got them into the US. So the bio mentioned how they had started brawls from one end of the UK to the other. And I'm thinking, oh, is this really what I want to be doing tonight? And so I hit it off with one of the roadies that were setting up the show, Barry Taylor. We're still friends to this day, but I had no idea what I was dealing with, and so but I was intimidated, of course, by their bio and their pictures. So I was the dressing room was in a loft above the bar. And I was up there and we had the beer and the soda and the cheese and the crackers and all of that and I'm looking at everything, making it all perfect, thinking, I don't want to piss anybody off.
Yeah.
And so as I'm walking out of the room, I'm backing out as the band is coming back from dinner now. So they're coming in. And Malcolm, who I didn't know was Malcolm yet, he came in first. He sat down on the couch facing me, and I was backing out, saying, beer there, soda there. If you want a mixed drink, come downstairs and get me. I'll get that for you. And this guy comes walking in with tats up and down his arms and shaggy dark hair. And he comes right in. He was about my size. He wasn't much taller than me, but he comes right up shoulder to shoulder with me, sticks his face in my face, and he goes, "Sit." And I was like, I'm not going to argue with this guy. And I grab a chair and I slide it over and I sit down and I'm thinking, oh my God, what is this going to be like? And he goes across the room and he pours two glasses of Blue Nun wine. He comes back to me, hands me a glass of wine, and he says, "Hi, I'm Bon Scott. You must be Sue." And then when I asked him, I was confused. I said, how do you know my name? And that's when Malcolm laughed and he said, "Oh, the promoter told us all about you. He said he was going to do you're going to do anything we want you to do." And you know, um, I'm speechless basically. But I had still not heard a note of the band playing yet. And I hung out with them until it was time for them to go on stage. And I went out by the soundboard. I was no more than like maybe 25 feet in front of the band.
Wow.
And the lights went down and they start, the rhythm section starts live wire. And spotlight comes on, hits Bon, no shirt on, super tight jeans. And I call it love at first scream.
Yeah.
And I literally when I heard them launch into Livewire, the hair on my arm stood straight up.
Yeah. The energy of that band
Yeah.
live, huh? Yeah.
Oh, and there was only about 75 people there. So it was
Wow.
pretty
Was
intimate.
it a
And
local band that opened for them?
I think they were out of Chicago. They're called the Hounds.
Okay.
They opened for them, and I didn't even see them because I was up in the loft talking to the band and, hanging out with those guys.
So
So,
75 people, yet they're performing like they're 75,000, right?
oh, totally.
That's kind
And
of
and
like
the
Van Halen. I know I've talked to you about Van Halen and you met the guys in the band. It's that similar thing. Like it doesn't matter how many people you're playing in front of, you're going to bring it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you and they and the thing about it at that time, they played, Live Wire, The Jack, Dirty Deeds, Whole Lotta Rosie, Problem Child, Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be. I mean, they had all these songs already.
That would become
And
eventual classics here in the US,
yes.
after Highway to Hell, after Back in Black. But yeah, at that time,
Yep.
few people knew about them, those songs. Wow.
Yeah, and so Barry and I actually, this is well before computers and cell phones, back in the dark ages. And he asked me for my phone number and my address, and that he said he'd keep in touch. Well, I didn't think he would, but I gave him the info, and he started sending me messages or calls or letters once a week for the next 3 years.
Wow. Which are in this
So
book right here.
yeah, so that's how I got to have close access to the band anytime that they played in this area, in the Wisconsin area where I lived.
Wow. Before we get to the beginning of ACDC, let's talk about Angus and Malcolm. You mentioned Malcolm and, of course, Angus, the two brothers, two of eight children in the family and a musical family. Give us a brief look at the Youngs pre ACDC.
Oh yeah, I mean they had Alex, one of the older brothers, had a band that he was in the UK and he got signed to a record label that was part of the Beatles, Apple Records. And then the older brother, when they were, still all living in Australia at the time, George Young, started or was in the Easy Beats, and they had, the big hit that is still, heard on the radio today, Friday on My Mind, and they exploded. And so while Angus and Malcolm were still, growing up in the house, their older brother George was literally a pop star. So, and they always, everybody, played music or had music around, guitars and access to all of that. So they really grew into it.
Were they in a few bands before ACDC?
Malcolm was in a band called the Velvet Underground, which was not the Lou Reed band, but he was in that. And then Angus was in two, I believe they were called Tantrum and Kentucky.
Okay.
So they were both, playing in the area kind of thing. And then Malcolm decided to, start his own band. And he kind of had to convince Angus to be in the band. He wanted him to play lead in the band. And they were, oh my God, I mean, they were still teenagers at the time.
Just kids.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Diehard ACDC fans know the name Dave Evans, but the passing fan may not even be aware he was
Hmm.
the first singer in a band. And you do cover that
Yes.
in the book, Let There Be Rock. How did
Yeah.
he end up getting the gig as ACDC lead singer?
Oh gosh, it's been so long since I talked to Dave. I think he just answered an audition that they were auditioning, and he answered an ad, and he got the gig, and he did a good job, but he was at the time they were still like experimenting, I guess, with their look. So for a while, like I mean, Angus went through a bunch of stuff. Angus was like super Ang, super A, like Superman.
He wore the monkey
Um,
suit early
yeah,
on,
he
did he?
was in
Yeah.
a gorilla suit at one
Yeah.
time, and Malcolm was dressed like a pilot, with the high boots and the scarf around his neck. And Dave Evans was more glam rock,
Right.
in the
Like
way
T
that he
Rex, Mark
presented.
Bolan type of look.
Exactly.
Right.
And so as they worked together, then they acquired, they had Mark Evans on bass and Phil Rudd, which was a huge find for them. Phil Rudd on drums, and Phil Rudd actually is the only member of the band that is a true Australian, that he was born in Australia.
Interesting.
Bon, yeah, Bon, Angus, and Malcolm were all born in Scotland, and then they emigrated to Australia when they were kids at different times, of course.
I love the story. What you say is the most bizarre ACDC gig, which was a friend's wedding. This is when Dave Evans was in the band, I believe. They received an odd request from the father of the bride, and Malcolm was able to come through last second. Do you remember this story from the book?
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They asked for a song, and Malcolm, it didn't take Malcolm long to figure out how to play it. And they performed at, like a wedding reception. And it just, I can't imagine seeing AC/DC at a wedding reception, but I'd love to be
Right.
there.
And it was some obscure song because I think
Oh yeah.
it was an older gentleman, so it was like I can't remember. We could look for it here, but yeah, they had some interesting gigs.
Mm,
But of course, we know that Dave Evans didn't last long, so he's out of the band. Bon
mm,
Scott, let's get to Bon. And reading
yeah.
about Bon in the book, you see his image was really not an image at all. Like that was Bon. You know,
Mm.
that was
Yeah, oh
him.
yeah, that was him.
Yeah, talk about his background. He came from a working class family, grew up in a tough place. He was a street fighter, right?
Yes, yes, and his dad was always playing drums. in the like the drum corps. I can't remember the proper name for it, but this started back in Scotland and then continued into Australia when they moved. And Bon was, I think, he was young. He was only like six or something, I think, when they first moved to Australia. But he would play with his dad, like when they would do a parade or they're playing out. Bon would follow his dad, and Bon actually started out as a drummer. So the first band that he started or he ended up in as he got older was the Valentines,
Yeah.
which was another, very pop type band.
Yeah, all dressed the
And
same, like red
yeah,
outfits, and it was almost like
yeah, the
a
fluffy shirts
yeah,
and
like almost like a Motown type of
yeah,
look.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and that's where he met Vince Lovegrove, I think. Sorry, I might be mispronouncing that. It's been a while.
I think that's it.
But yeah, Vince, he was the leader of the Valentines, and he, definitely loved Bon. He said some really funny quote about, how he was cute, and cute went a long way in those days. So he sang with the Valentines, and then that ended up breaking up, and then he joined a band called Fraternity, which was like the band or Grateful Dead type
Right. Very different.
music, and
Yeah.
yeah, very like folksy, and
Yes.
and I think they all lived on a farm together, and they were kind of hippie-ish. Bon was had his hair longer and all that, and so that's when which is crazy. Fraternity got to tour the UK, and this is, at the same time that Brian Johnson was in a band called Geordie. So when Bon was in the UK, and I have to look it up, I don't remember the exact town it was in, but he saw Brian Johnson perform, which was how crazy is that? And Brian was having an appendix attack, appendicitis. So he was like you know, in pain and he put all he could into the performance to get through it, but Bond thought that this was like part of the act. And Bond was, super impressed with him. And I have read stories that they did meet and they did have some drinks together and stuff at some point. I don't know if he saw him more than once, but he also saw Brian carry Brian's guitarist on his shoulders. That's where Bond got the idea to put Angus on his shoulders.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and then at some point after, Bond ended up in AC/DC, he said to them, if you ever need to replace me, you have to look into this guy named Brian Johnson, which once Bond passed, they didn't remember that. That's not how he got the audition. A fan in the United States actually, after Bond passed, sent a cassette tape of Geordie to AC/DC's management. And that's how Brian Johnson got the call to audition for the band.
As fate would have it, as they say.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
they actually had met.
Yeah.
And
The history of ACDC, it's kind of got some myth, some fact. Like Bon was either roadie, was he either that was the thing too. That it's not really sure. Like
yeah,
how did
well,
he join ACDC, Bon?
what I've read and when I did my research and everything is that Bon, he was in a very serious motorcycle accident when he was in fraternity. It's amazing he lived through it because he had a lot of injuries. Took him a very long time to recover. And Vince, his friend Vince, was giving him odd jobs to, help him make some money, things like that. And so he may have driven the band around a little bit,
Right.
but I haven't really confirmed that those stories. But I know that Vince knew that, they wanted to get rid of Dave Evans. Vince knew George Young, so Vince and George were friends. and he found out that the band needed a singer, and that's when he told Bon, he said, "You've got to audition for these guys." Well, Bon was older than everybody in the band, and when they first heard about how old he was, which he was in his late 20s, I mean, he wasn't that old, but
No.
in those days, that was old.
But yeah, I think
And
they were about 21, 22. They were
oh,
about,
yeah, they were young, yeah,
yeah,
no pun intended, but
yeah.
but you know, Bon heard that they thought that he was too old, and he said, I can rock the socks off of those guys. I mean, they just need to give me a chance, and so he had quite the attitude about them thinking he was too old. And of course, he auditioned for the band, and it was it was perfection.
Yeah, and
And
they
again,
also, he had the image they wanted.
yeah, well, yeah, exactly,
That
and
was
and it
what they were
was
looking for.
him.
Yeah.
That I was going to say he had the tats, he had the look, he had the attitude. But what's funny, he's kind of portrayed or has been portrayed as this really rough guy that got into a lot of fights and things like that. But maybe that may be true in earlier years in his life, but he was a very peaceful guy. I mean, he would rather like break up a fight than be part of a fight. So he was just a lot more friendly than people kind of look at him in those days.
And I always think about, he was a loyal friend. And actually, around this time of year now, holidays, I always think about that story about he would send Christmas cards to all his friends every year.
Mm,
He never forgot. People
yeah.
he knew, he never forgot about. That was really
Oh yeah.
cool. Loyal
Yep.
friend, loyal friend. The chapter in the book, it's chapter 4. It's a perfect title. It's a long way to top if you want to rock and roll, because that was the case for AC/DC. It wasn't like an overnight success. You were mentioning how
Oh,
when they came to the US, people didn't even know who they were. 75 people at a gig when they already had, I don't know, a handful of albums, right? You have the first album's High Voltage. This always gets confusing. There's the Australian release, there's a US release,
right.
so it gets a little
Right.
fuzzy here, but High Voltage released in Australia in 75, internationally in 76. TNT was an Australian release in 75. Dirty Deeds
Mm,
Done Dirt Cheap released in Australia in 76. Not until
yep.
1981 in the
Hmm.
US, international. The, the band was working hard. I mean, working hard on the road constantly. But I wonder why US record labels didn't see the potential there. What was it that what did they want out of ACDs? Because you're talking about a bit. These songs are so catchy. I
Oh
don't know. I
yeah.
don't know how you couldn't hear this and say, yeah, this is perfect to get on the radio here in the States, but don't know. Then the guys didn't like the label folks too much either, right? I mean,
No.
they so why do you think they were so late to the game with ACDC here in the States?
Um, well, when you think back about like I said, I saw so many bands before I saw AC/DC. And to me, when I first saw AC/DC, they sounded like no one I had ever heard. So they definitely had their own corner of the market there where they weren't like anybody else. And I know that I did several interviews with the late Perry Cooper, who worked for Atlantic Records. And he was a very big part of getting them signed to the label. One of the things that the record company was leery of was Angus's Duck Walk was too much like Chuck Berry,
Mm-hmm.
in their opinion.
Which he was a huge fan of. He was a
Yeah,
huge fan of
yeah.
Chuck
So
Berry.
yeah, and he does it so well. I mean, you know, but I know that Perry they actually the label got a I don't know, I can't remember the name of the thing, but it was to play a video on. And in those days, it was kind of like a recording on a circular device, and you could see, the band live. And when they saw that, Perry was like, these guys, we've got to give them a chance. We just have to. We have to, like, sign these guys. And I know there are other people at Atlantic Records, which I won't name, who took a lot of credit for the fact that AC/DC got signed
Oh,
to the label, but
yeah.
Perry was a very big part of that. Perry became very close friends with Bon, and went on a lot of tours with them, and always shared a room with Bon. So it was Perry that convinced the label to take a chance on them.
Yeah, he did all sorts of creative stuff to promote the band. There's something in the
Mhm.
book, the story about one where Angus is mic'd up live. There's like a radio broadcast, and so they had Angus mic'd up, so he's literally doing a broadcast while he's on stage. I think, right? That
Yeah,
was the
yeah, they did so many things, and one of the first cities that really, uh, the band took off in, if you will, was Jacksonville, Florida.
okay.
That became a huge, city for them. And but when I did the research for the book, when I first wrote the book, when it came out in 2006, I literally broke their history down a week at a time and talking about how hard they worked. I went for a 7-year period before I found a break longer than 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, they were touring hard. I thought there
Hmm.
was a show, the Day on the Green show in Oakland of '78. I thought maybe
Yeah.
you're going to say that was a big day.
Oh yeah.
Barry Taylor, you mentioned him. You were in
Hmm.
contact with him. He wrote to you often, and he's writing about at that period. He's telling you about how they go on at 10:30 a.m. This is with who else was there? Was it? This is with
I
was Van
think
Halen part of that?
not
No,
yet.
no.
No, I
Like
think
Ted
Ted
Nugent and
Nugent and
a lot of big
man,
acts. Journey, maybe.
yes.
Point being, they go on at
Hmm.
10:30 a.m. Not the greatest slot, but
Hmm.
70,000 people on their feet. So I was wondering,
Yeah.
is this really when we start to see, or at least when Barry starts to feel like, yeah, this band's on the verge of breaking big? Is that
Yeah, it definitely because I met them at the end of 77, and 78 was a very big year for them as far as like, getting noticed. And
Power Age was the album, which is
oh yeah,
that's the AC/DC fans will a lot of them will say that's their best album, which is
it
really
is.
interesting, because you'd think
Yeah.
Highway to Hell or Back in Black, but that's the one.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
love
that's
that
your
album. I
favorite.
love
Yeah,
every single song on that record. And what I like about that record is that because I had seen them in bars and, small venues and then, on their way up to stadiums, but Power Age gives you the sound that they really put off the stage if you were seeing them live. It's has a rawness to it
it just
that
doesn't have a huge hit single, but that's the only thing.
right,
It's kind of
right,
like
yeah.
Montrose's album where there's no huge single, but you listen to the whole thing from start to finish. It's
Hmm.
amazing. Yeah.
Well,
Sorry, I kind of
yeah.
cut you off. You were talking,
Oh
but
no, that's no,
that
that's
was
okay. But
that's the
but
point where we're at here.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so by August of 78, they were opening for Aerosmith. So that's when, and they got more tour buses and more roadies, and things were really starting to take off, but yet they still didn't have that hit song on the radio.
Yeah. Power Age, Rock and Roll Damnation, the only single from that album, according
Hmm.
to Wikipedia.
Yeah. There's such great songs on there. I mean, Riff Raff,
Oh,
oh my God. I mean,
Gone
What's Next to the
Shooting,
Moon?
What's
Yeah,
Next to the Moon.
yep.
I
Uh,
remember I remember from Anthrax, Scott Ian on a podcast talking about that was his favorite album, I think, too. Yeah, What's Next to
mm,
the Moon, Kicked in the Teeth, Sin City.
yep, yeah. Well,
And,
that's also it turned out to be Malcolm's favorite album, and it's Keith Richards' favorite AC/DC
oh,
album.
really?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow,
So we're
that's
in
cool.
good company.
Sure. And then what was the one Wolfgang and Eddie Van Halen loved together? Might have been Power Age. That might
I
have been
think
the
it
one,
was.
too.
I think
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the Highway to Hell album, that's 1979. That's when the band blows up,
Hmm.
internationally. They're at the top with the best of the game in rock and roll.
Yep.
October 79, you saw the band play in Chicago at the Aragon Ballroom, and you had a great visit with the band on their tour bus, and you talk about it in the book. And then on the ride back to Wisconsin, you say you cried without really knowing why, but you look back on it years later
Hmm.
and you feel you may know why. Talk about that last visit with Bon and the band.
Yeah, I had seen them several times in 1978, and that's where I got the iconic pictures with them, which is, to this day still makes me laugh because we did, there is the paper that I worked for was now the Emerald City Chronicle, which was a different paper than what I started out with. And we were very popular. We came out every 2 weeks and we had, everybody on the cover. So when they opened for Aerosmith at Alpine Valley in East Troy, Wisconsin, I believe it was August 3rd of 1978, I the photographer that I worked with, he always had me get into the picture after he got his cover shots, and that's where we got the shot of, Bond's head on my shoulder, and it was so priceless, but it was getting very exciting because, things were really looking up. And then the whole thing, it's funny, a lot of people don't realize how many people lost jobs over Highway to Hell. Okay. The first two were the record because they didn't have a hit, on the radio, and then the record label was demanding we've got to come up with something. So they did not want them to do another album with George Young and Harry Vanda, and they had only worked with them up until that point.
Yeah, they co-produced every album.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. They,
Okay.
and back in the day, I mean, George played bass, George played drums. Whenever they were, missing a member, George filled in. George had a lot to do with teaching them how to write songs. He was a huge part, and they had to let them go, which was horrible for Angus and Malcolm
It's
to
family.
have to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, family. And then the record label sent them down to Miami, or yeah, I think it was in Miami, and to work with uh, Eddie Kramer, the producer. Now, they did not mesh very well. Um, at some point, and this like swearing to Malcolm, Eddie wanted them to add keyboards to some of
Ugh.
the songs. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. What, So the guys, they're so funny. They decided they weren't having it. I mean, they it was not going well at all, and this was Highway to Hell. The record label didn't want to call it Highway to Hell. They had to fight over that. And so Eddie Kramer, they told Eddie they were taking a day off. So don't come in. We're skipping a day. So Eddie's not there. So Angus, Malcolm, and Bon, who can play drums, they go into the studio and do a little demo of a couple of the songs, and they get a hold of Michael Browning, who was their manager at the time. He was a really great guy. I mean, he helped them a lot. And he just so happened to be, I'm trying to think where they were. He was with Mutt Lang or in touch with Mutt Lang. And they sent this demo tape to Michael and said, "We're not working with Eddie Kramer. This is not happening. Find us somebody else." That's where Mutt Lang came in.
And Mutt Lang
And
was not Mutt Lang, the big producer at this time, right?
right.
But
Well, I think
or had he
he
done?
I think he had done some stuff, but
Okay,
I'm trying to think. I know, he did a lot with Bon Jovi and Def Leppard and all of that, but
which
the
was
dates
years
I'm
later,
yeah,
early
yeah, it
'80s,
was.
mid '80s. Yeah.
Yeah, so he Michael, played the demo for Mutt. Mutt was very, interested at the time, and so they got together and they recorded. But so we have George and Harry lose their job. Eddie Kramer loses his job. Two guys at Atlantic Records that were shoving Eddie Kramer down their throats, they lost their jobs. And then after I don't know exactly what the timing was, but Michael Browning was let go. So six people lost their jobs over the recording of Highway to Hell.
Wow.
And of course, I was lucky enough, which is, talk about things in your life that you just can't put a price on it. They had started their If You Want Blood, You Got It tour in Madison, Wisconsin, where I lived at the time. And they had one date that I think it was in London or something that got canceled. So the very first date of that tour was here in Wisconsin. And after the end of the show that night, we went back to the Sheridan Hotel to Phil Rudd's room. And Phil Rudd always had like a big sound system, big boombox type thing. And he myself and a couple of my friends were invited to his room to hang out after the show, and have a couple beers. And he said, "I've got the cassette tape of the new album, Highway to Hell. Do you want to hear it?"
Oh, so you heard it before anybody else.
Yes, yes, I did. And it was, oh my God. I mean, I'm getting chills talking about it. It's hard to describe how cool it was because Mutt, God bless, Harry and George, they did a great job with the band. But when Mutt, got a hold of Highway to Hell, that was it. That was their sound. And it was so exciting. I mean, Phil, everybody was really, really excited. And then, of course, when it came out, they ended up, I think, two different songs were in the on the charts right away, and they got airplay, what they were looking for all this time.
So that
So,
tape, was it finished, mixed, all that, or was it still in
mhm.
demo?
Oh
Okay.
yeah,
Oh, so you're
yeah, it was
listening
a finished product.
whole thing. So you were listening to the whole album.
Yep, yep. Played the whole album. Yeah.
Wow. Just to clarify, Mutt Lang, really, this was his big breakthrough. He did work with the Boomtown Rats prior to that,
Okay.
but I don't see. I mean, Outlaws, Playing to Win, 1978, Michael Stanley Band, Savoy Brown. So I mean, he'd been working and producing since
Hmm.
74, 75, but really this was because then he followed with Foreigner and Def Leppard and the Cars and et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
And we should also know too, Eddie Kramer was huge at that time. He did Hendrix, he did
He
Kiss, he
was.
did
Yeah.
Ace's solo album. So
Yes.
yeah, that was a pretty crazy time. February 20th. No, oh, actually, you know what? Let's back up though, because you're driving home that night and you said
Oh, yes.
yeah. So looking back on that, you felt like something wasn't. You felt like maybe this was the
Yeah.
last time you were ever going to see him.
Well, yeah, I saw him in October, as you said, of 79 at the Aragon Ballroom in Chicago. And the band, to me, they were burned out. They were so tired. And I felt bad for them that night. I really did. They were going back to, play some dates over the holidays like they do they went back to Australia for the holidays. And then I knew that they were going to London in January to start a new album. So they had worked so hard, and I felt bad for them that night. I felt like, my God, I mean, these guys have been how many years now, with hardly no breaks and all of that. And when I went home that night, because I was down in Chicago, so it's a couple hour drive back to Madison, I cried on the way home, and I didn't understand why. I never felt that way before after seeing them. I was always happy and elated and, just excited. And I had just this horrible sadness come over me. And I cried and I thought, what's this? Where is this coming from? And then it kind of hit me that, that was the last time that I saw Bon,
3 months later,
you
he
know.
passed.
Yeah, he was
February
gone
20th, 1980. Yeah.
right after. Yeah.
Tell us about that day, how you heard the news of Bond's death and what your reaction was.
Oh my
It's a
goodness.
tough time for you.
Well, my mom was dying of cancer and she was in the hospital. And on the weekends, when she felt up to it, we could take her home for a few days. So I was in Madison driving up to the hospital to pick up my mom. And to me, everything with AC/DC was like super exciting. Highway to Hell finally did it. They're up at the top now. This next album is super important, and everybody was so excited about it. So when I was driving, they were playing a song off Highway to Hell, which I I think I've blacked out of like what the song was. But of course, I'm blasting the song in my car on the way to the hospital. And after the song ends, the DJ comes on and says, and that's in tribute to the late Bon Scott, who was found dead in a car this morning in London, England. And oh God, I just got shivers just saying that. Needless to say, I had to pull over. I couldn't drive. I burst into tears. I found a phone booth and called my boyfriend at the time and said, turn on the radio, turn on the TV, whatever you have. We had no internet. I wanted confirmation. Is this, I just didn't want to believe it was real. And so when I got up to the hospital, my mom, she had talked to Barry because I lived with her for a while. She had talked to Barry and, was very aware of the boys. When they did their first TV appearance on Midnight Special, they did Sin City. I watched that with my mom. And it was really cute because, she only knew of them, but when she saw that performance, she's like, "Oh, they are really good."
I love it.
I know. And I said, "I know, aren't they great? I think they're going to be really big." And so when I heard that news, I went into my mom's hospital room, trying to, act like there was nothing wrong. And of course, she picked up right away that, I was really upset, and we cried together. And then 6 weeks later, she died too.
Oh,
So that
wow.
was, yeah, I
Man,
mean,
what a yeah, what a terrible time. When did
yeah.
you get to talk to Barry after that? When was the next time you got in touch with him?
Probably just over letters and because what happened was the end of 79, early 1980, he left the band. So he
Okay.
stopped working for them.
So another
So
person departs
yeah,
from the AC/DC family. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So he wasn't working with them anymore. So I know that, we talked about it, but not anything like I don't think he knew any more than I did about what
So
really happened
he
or,
probably found out about the same time
yeah,
you did.
probably the same way.
In those days, it was through the radio or newspaper. There was no
Yep.
internet. There
Nope.
was no social media. So
Yeah.
that news hit you a little late.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and it's just and there's so many rumors that go around about his death, and it drives me crazy,
Yeah.
basically.
That's what I was
Be
going to ask you about, what's misunderstood about Bond. And I know there's a lot of talk about how he died. There's a lot of talk about did he write the lyrics to Back in Black?
Mhm.
So, what are
I,
your feelings
uh,
on that?
what I know is that, I found out that he had, liver issues from drinking, and he had not taken care of that. And the night that he died, he had, I think it was seven whiskeys in his stomach. And a lot of people, or not a lot of people, there's a particular author that I don't even know what to say about what he says about Bond because he's convinced that Bond died of a heroin overdose. Now, I know where Bond's head was at when he was getting ready to do Back in Black and, how excited he was. Maybe he did a line of what he thought was coke and it wasn't, it was heroin. That's a possibility. But I do not believe with all of my being that he was using heroin and he went out looking for heroin and he died of an overdose and they covered it up and this author that I know that you've spoken to, he wrote a whole book about it. And his what's interesting to me is that, and he's blocked me for this because I contacted him and I said, if this is true, the four people that you spoke with, now two of them are not even alive anymore. The four people that you spoke with apparently lied 40 years ago then. So 40 years ago, they all had a different story. And now 40 years later, they decide to come clean and say, oh, yeah, this is what happened to him. And I said, if that is true, then why did you not contact Scotland Yard or, the police and report a murder investigation? There's no statute of limitations on a murder investigation. Why didn't he do that? He didn't do that because there's no proof. Only people that decided to change their stories 40 years later, which I
Hmm.
don't understand why you would do that.
The unfortunate reality is he was gone way too soon. 33.
33, yeah. Oh yeah, I mean it's
Eh,
a horrible tragedy,
Yeah,
but it's very hurtful and annoying to constantly hear about this, huge cover up and, and that he wrote the lyrics. And I know that they had the song titles. I know that Bon, actually worked out the opening to Have a Drink on Me on the drums because he was in the studio. He stopped into the studio and played the drums, and they were working on that song. And then he was gone a couple days later. That was the last time Angus and Malcolm saw him.
yeah,
So, you know, how much he wrote of it, I have no idea.
yeah.
I go with Angus and Malcolm because I respect them. And I think that, if he had written enough of it to give him credit for it or something, that they would have done that. I know that, there's also talk about that the Bon Scott family has always received royalties for Back in Black. And that is totally Angus and Malcolm. I mean, Bond never got to live the life of that type of money coming in. They made sure his family was taken care of.
Mm,
Simple as that.
yeah. Our
So,
guest is author Susan Masino, wrote the book Let There Be Rock, the story of AC/DC, the updated edition released in 2020 through Omnibus Press. And she's also the author of 2015's AC/DC FAQ, All That's Left to Know About the World's True Rock and Roll Band. Also, we should know, too, Rock and Roll Fantasy, My Life and Times with AC/DC, Van Halen, and Kiss. That was 2003. That
oh
came
yeah,
out, I believe, yeah. I had you on
yep.
for that one. Yeah. Well, we know how huge the band became with Brian Johnson. That next album, Back in Black. Did you have
Oh
your
yeah.
doubts? Did you have your doubts that they would succeed without Bon? What was your
Oh,
reaction when you first heard it?
totally. When I heard, I mean, I knew that they were going to continue. They had to. I mean, as I said, they worked their behinds off how many years? And, when they went to the funeral for Bond's parents, both of them encouraged Angus and Malcolm, you have to keep going. Bond would not want you to quit because he's gone. So, but of course, anybody to replace Bon Scott, that's like, replacing the proverbial unicorn, it's like who can do that? And I know it sounds kind of crazy, but when Back in Black was released in July of 1980, I didn't listen to it.
No.
I didn't want to hear it.
Too hard for you.
Every time a song came on the radio, I'd turn it off because I thought to myself, I'm not going to hear this until I see him live, which I did a couple of times on that tour. And the first one was September 14th of 1980 when they came to Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, and played the Dane County Coliseum. I met Angus's new wife that night, Ellen, and he introduced me to Brian. And Brian seemed very sweet and very nice, but still, I had no idea what it was going to be like. And they went out on stage, and it was a sold out show. Lights are down, and then all of a sudden, this bell starts ringing. And like I said, I had not heard anything from the Back in Black album. And so the bell is chiming and they launch into Hell's Bells. And I mean, it was for me, it was like I started to cry and I felt Bon was like standing next to me. And I said to Bon, I said to him, I said, they're going to be okay, aren't they? And he said, they're going to be just fine.
So you needed to be convinced as to how they were live. That was
Right.
important. Like, am I gonna feel the same that I felt when I first saw them with Bon?
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm,
It's still
yeah.
hard. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Back in Black, but it's still a hard album to listen to for me because they I believe to this day that I can hear their pain. I can hear how much pain they were in when they recorded that. And that's why it's such a phenomenal, it's not just the songs. The energy and the love and the loss, you can hear it. At least I can. So,
The biggest difference between this story and Van Halen's story is you got Brian Johnson giving nothing but respect to Bon. Whereas
yes.
with Sammy and Dave, oil and water.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, not happening.
that really made a huge difference in terms of the legacy of the band. You know,
Hmm.
it
Oh,
just avoids
definitely.
all of that he's better and this all that stuff. There are going to be people that are going to say Bond's better than Brian, or I like Brian better than whatever, but nothing like with the Van Halen situation. And as we know, we're gonna when we finish this up, we're gonna talk about the upcoming U.S. tour dates. I mean, here they are; they're still going, and they had such a long run that continues with Brian.
Hmm.
That's interesting to look at too, because then as you get into the '80s, as we know, styles change, the hair band era, the whole thing,
Hmm.
and they survive. I mean, they did. They always
Yep.
had their tours were always huge. The albums did okay, but
Hmm.
then you get to Razor's Edge in '89, I believe, 89, 90.
I think it was
No, it was 90,
1990.
90. Yeah.
1990. Yep.
This is their big comeback. What was it about that? Actually, before that, what are some of your favorite '80s era AC/DC albums post Back in Black?
Probably, for those about to rock.
Of course. Yeah.
And then, they were kind of like fly on the wall and flick of the switch and, blow up
Yeah.
your video. I went and saw them on that tour.
The blow up your
So,
video is wild because that's like '80s
yeah.
production. But
Yeah.
maybe it's just because of my age, but I like some of the stuff on those albums. I mean,
Oh, sure.
I Flick of the Switch is the opposite, where they really wanted to get raw and nasty on that.
Hmm.
It's
Yep.
like they just hit record and play. What else
Yep.
was yeah, Fly on the Wall?
But what's sad about it in the 80s is that Bon Scott's death took its toll on everyone in the band.
Yeah,
And that's where, Phil Rudd, um, ended up having problems with drugs and was let go of the band from
he
the
was.
band, um, I believe in 83.
Yeah,
And then
Simon Wright was the
yeah,
drummer. Maybe
yep,
even another guy that stepped into. I know with Razor's Edge, it was the drummer from The Firm,
yeah, Chris Slade,
Chris
yep.
Slade, great drummer.
But they had
Yeah,
Simon Wright for I think a good 7 years or
right.
so.
Yeah, yeah.
And but then Malcolm on the Blow Up Your Video tour, the night that I saw them, Stevie was playing for Malcolm because
Isn't
Malcolm
that
had to quit drinking.
now? That's interesting because then Stevie, now a current member of the band, but that's like a little piece
Yeah.
of trivia there. Like, yeah, he replaced Malcolm before that because Malcolm
Hmm.
was going through his struggles with alcohol. I think that's
Yes, he was.
well, maybe that answers the question: why was Razor's Edge so successful? But Malcolm was back on his game,
Yeah. Oh God, yeah.
right? So
Yeah, they
he's
were
yeah,
ready to go, and nothing against Simon Wright, but I had to have a bit of a giggle as I researched that period of time when Malcolm was out, after he got out of rehab. He finally got to go see AC/DC from the audience, which he'd never done before. And his reaction was, "We need a different drummer." And that's when, by the time they got to Razor's Edge, that's where Chris Slade comes in because
yeah.
Malcolm decided they needed somebody different.
And then Malcolm and Angus, or maybe just Malcolm, is doing the lyrics now at this point.
Mhm. Yes, yeah, yep.
And there's a great story about Thunderstruck. I always love this story. I have the book still. It's called Behind the Boards, and the story about. I feel bad. I can't remember the author's name now, but he's talking to all the engineers and people that were part of those albums, and they're talking about Angus doing that whole guitar part on Thunderstruck.
Mhm.
It's one take. I mean, it's one take, and he had a cigarette. He lit up the cigarette, started, and he was so focused that the cigarette butt was like just kind of burning down, like you see the ashes. He wouldn't flinch, wouldn't move. He's just the engineer said all I had to do was fade down during the verses, pull it
Hmm.
back up. So what you're
Yep.
hearing, he's telling you that that's not cut. That's no splicing. There's no studio magic. That's just
Oh yeah.
Angus one take. That's still
But
one of my.
what I did read though is that he taped some of the strings to not make a sound when
Okay.
he did that. Yeah, when he recorded it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, when they came back with Razor's Edge, I was so happy for them. I mean, I was just over the moon.
You saw the band, right? Tell me about that. You got to see them, and then
Yep.
that's when you realize, like, wow, this is a big production.
Oh yeah, no,
These guys are.
it's so funny as I always say, like the night that I saw them at the Stone Hearth, they gave the same show as they give today. They just didn't have all the toys. So now they have, the staging and the lighting and they grew into this huge production. And when they came back to Madison to the Dane County Coliseum, it was December, I want to say December of 1990. And they were reintroduced to a new generation of fans through Beavis and Butthead on MTV.
Yep.
So when I saw them that night, when they did everything, I mean, Razor's Edge, Thunderstruck, Money Talks, I mean, it just,
Are you ready?
wow.
It's another great
Yeah,
one. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that I was so happy for them. And that night, actually, I got to, talk to Angus and Malcolm, and I had brought them. Now, this is how many years later? 78 to 1990, so 12 years later. I had copies of the pictures of us together from the night they opened for Aerosmith. And I gave them some copies of those pictures, and then I had them autograph the back of mine. And I'll never forget when Angus looked at those pictures, he got tears in his eyes, and he looked at me and he said, Bon looked great then, didn't he, Sue? And I said, Bon was at his peak then, Angus. He was at his best.
What a
And
moment.
every time we see each other, we always Bon is always brought up. Bon is never far away. He's always there, which is super cool.
Absolutely. And the band's legacy just continued to grow and got bigger and bigger through the 90s into the
Hmm.
2000s. And your book ends around 2020. Wasn't
Yeah.
long after the updated version that we got Power Up, November
Yep.
2020. They had
Yeah.
overcome Brian Johnson losing his voice, Malcolm Young sadly passing.
Yeah.
They not only returned with an album, but a really good album. I mean, Power Up
Hmm.
is, it's like, all right, I mean, they won't stop. If you
Oh
were to
yeah.
add a chapter in the book on that album, I'm curious as to what you would have had to say about it. Number one, were you surprised that it came out? And two, what did you think of it?
Well, I knew that they had the album for they were holding on to it, and we had were hit with the pandemic. And they released it finally, I believe, in November of 2020. And I, on my Facebook page, I have a lot of followers that are AC/DC fans, and I was begging the band online, release it. We need it.
Yeah,
It's the pandemic. Everybody's miserable. And so I knew that they had it. And I was very happy when they released it and, the dedication to Malcolm. And you can feel Malcolm's spirit in that album. And, they still have so many good songs. And I still think they have more.
you
But,
do. So
I
you
don't
think they got?
know.
Yeah.
I don't know if they'll, record another album or not, but
Now, are
I
we
know
talking
that
songs that Malcolm wrote that are still
there
there,
could
or
be.
okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of what it sounds like to me that they still have that. But I was just so happy for them, and yeah, I was frustrated because I knew that the album was going to come out while I was updating the book, but I didn't know the title of the
Oh,
album.
yeah.
So
And there was a
so
deadline, right? Did you have a deadline to get
yeah,
it
yeah,
out?
I had a deadline
Yeah.
and so I titled the last chapter 21 Gun Salute because I was trying to think of like, God, what title would they use for this one? But yeah, I'm so proud and so, just in awe of their talent. I mean, for me, knowing them, getting to know Malcolm and getting to know Angus and Brian and Bon and Cliff and Phil, they're all geniuses. And to me, it's been just a lifetime honor to get that close to someone that talented, and especially Malcolm. I mean, he was so funny. I mean, he was the boss.
Was
He
he?
was he
Yeah.
was yeah, he was the boss. He called the shots, and you would never be able to tell that if you were around him. He was super laid back, he was chatty, but he was soft spoken. He didn't do a lot of interviews.
He liked Angus being the showman. Like,
Yes,
you do
yes,
your
and
thing. I'll be back
yep.
here.
And one of my favorite quotes from Malcolm is someone asked him one time, they said, "How do you feel about your brother being, out in front, the focal point of the band, and he's always doing all the interviews?" And Malcolm just simply said, "If he was getting paid more than me, it'd bother me."
It's rare that brothers get along like brothers in a band because we know like the
Oh,
Robinson brothers, Black Crowes,
yep,
the Davies brothers with the Kinks. So there's
yep,
only really two instances, and I keep bringing them up. But Eddie and Alex, they had a special bond. They fought like crazy, but they loved each other.
yep.
But Malcolm and Angus, did they ever butt heads? Were they
I
just? They
I
seemed
know
such
that.
peaceful guys. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I know that they did back in the day. I've
yeah,
read, some things about their scuffles, but
but there's
they
not
were
like an ego
so.
clash, not like,
Yeah,
hey, this is
no, it
my
was.
band. No, it's my band kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I think that there was, I mean, Malcolm was the older brother, of course, by a couple years, but to me, they had so much respect for each other. I think, and they kind of, knew how special the other one was. And you'll never, God bless Stevie, but you'll never see two people play like Malcolm and Angus did, the way that they played together.
Right. And I was going to say, you talk about brilliant, that rhythm section,
Ugh.
underrated, I would say. I mean, although you hear every now and then musicians talk about how badass that rhythm section and tight it is, because you
Oh,
could say when Phil Rudd comes back, it's like, okay, yeah, there's
mhm,
something about it. Even though it's a straight ahead beat, it's not like it's jazz work here. We're not doing all this, time
mhm.
changes and all that, but it's so tight. It's like super tight.
Oh yeah.
And so, and you mentioned Cliff Williams, we got to mention bass, and then Phil Rudd, Angus, and Malcolm, just the tightest rhythm section ever, and it's just so infectious. Those songs, that's why I think
Oh
I could
yeah.
listen to pretty much any AC/DC album, pretty much any song, and I'm locked in. But
Hmm.
they are two different eras. I mean, I know there's a different style there with Brian and Bond, but
Hmm.
it's still at the root of it is that rhythm section, man. It's just
Oh,
undeniable,
well, to me,
undeniable.
I think that they, like Malcolm, Phil, and Cliff, were some of the greatest rhythm sections in rock and roll ever.
Yes, absolutely.
You
So now,
know, like,
so Cliff is retired, right? He came out
mhm,
just to do the album. So right now, this tour,
mhm.
it's Stevie Young, it's Phil Rudd on drums. I'm assuming. Is he?
Uh,
Do
no,
we
they have a
know?
new drummer.
So there's
They
a
have a
new
different
drummer for the tour.
different drummer and a different bass player.
How about that? Okay,
So,
yeah. So yeah, because I'm just trying to find like who the current lineup is. But we know we got Brian, we know we got Angus out there, we know we got
mhm,
Stevie Young. So
yep.
I'm curious as to who's on drums. I,
I know I should have that in front of me, and I don't.
Chris
And
Slade, maybe. Let's see.
no, no, it's had somebody he played with Jane's Addiction,
Oh,
and
oh,
yeah,
Jesus.
uh, yeah. Do you want to look it up, or should
Yeah,
I?
I'm gonna look it up here, and I
Yeah, I'm
should know
sorry I
this
don't
right
have their
off.
names. I should have their names, but
I should know
yeah.
if we're talking about the original drummer. We're talking about, uh, jeez, isn't this bad?
Yeah,
we're
really.
we're we're losing our memories here. Where is it here? Jane's Addiction drummer. Yeah, because as we know, anybody in Jane's Addiction does not have a gig these days because because of the fallout on stage with Perry
Oh
Farrell
yeah,
and
yeah.
Dave
There,
Navarro. But
I'm trying to look it up too.
you're right, Jane's Addiction drummer would be
Okay. Matt Log.
Oh, okay. So not
He's
Stephen
on
Perkins, because
drums.
Stephen Perkins is
Oh,
the
he was like the original.
yeah.
Yeah, so Matt Logg and Chris Chaney is on bass.
Wow. Okay, Matt.
So one of them played for Jane's Addiction. I
Yeah.
know
Well,
that.
he made well. Jane's Addiction had some varying lineups too. Is it Matt Lang? Lang?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
So yeah, I know they're coming here in. I'm on the East Coast, New England. So they're coming to what do they call it? Gillette Stadium? I want to say Foxborough, Gillette Stadium, and I mean, I really want to go. It's like decent seats, maybe 600, 700. You know,
Oh,
and anything less than that, I'm going to be up in the nosebleeds, and I have a tremendous fear of heights, so I don't know if I
yeah.
can. But it's May the 5th. Do you want to? Are they coming near you? Do you know?
The closest they're coming is Soldier Field in
Okay.
Chicago on I think it's May 24th.
Are you thinking about going?
And I'd like to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope I can get tickets. I usually get tickets, but I never know until they're a couple weeks out from that date,
Yep.
because they have, it's so much to deal with. So I won't know. If they're like $600 tickets, I probably won't be doing that.
They are, yeah, they're pricey. Yeah, they're pricey, but I don't
Yeah,
like watching clips on YouTube because it doesn't do it justice.
right.
You got to be there live. I'll just finish with this. Then, if you had a song that the band hasn't played in a while, or maybe never played, that you want to see them play, what would it be? Something off
Um,
of Power Age?
well, yeah, Down Payment Blues.
Yeah.
I have seen them do that live,
Okay.
but it's been a long time. That or like Riff Raff, that would be awesome to see them do that
That'd
one.
be cool if they did, like a lot of bands, play a whole album.
Oh, I know.
I don't
That
think they've
will,
done that.
God, that would be so cool. They have so many songs to pick from. It's
Yeah.
got to be, quite the job to decide, what they're actually going to play.
You got to
So,
include like five gimmies. Like you have to do the Highway to Hell. You have to do Back in Black. You have to do Shook Me all night long.
mhm.
So yeah, then you're left with okay, what are we gonna do? I tell you one song from Razor's Edge that I always loved: "Fire Your Guns."
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that'd be cool if they
Yep.
played that. Well, we'll
And I
see.
also what they did for a movie that you don't hear it much is Big Guns. I love
Great
that song.
song.
That's a
Great song.
great song.
That was off of yeah. What was the is it Arnold Schwarzenegger film?
Uh, Maximum Overdrive,
Maximum.
I
No,
think. Or
Maximum
was that?
Overdrive would have been Who Made Who.
Oh yeah, okay.
That was the last action hero, I think, or with
Yeah, yeah, with Arnold. Yeah, because Arnold, they did a video with Arnold, and Arnold dresses up as Angus.
yeah, yeah. You're right though; those are great songs. There were songs that kind of get forgotten throughout,
Hmm.
like the '90s when they had the album produced by what was the one in the '90s? Hard, not Hard as a Rock. Uh,
Oh, Ballbreaker.
Ballbreaker,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
has
There's good stuff on there too.
yeah, yeah. They didn't seem to enjoy. I mean, they have respect for uh, the Rick Rubin who produced it, but it didn't have that chemistry there. But Hard as a Rock, Cover You Know All, Hail Caesar were the singles, but it's the here's another one I love, Ballbreaker, the title, the title track.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, love that. And I got to when I first started in radio, I at least had the opportunity to say I could play a new AC/DC song, and I did that with "Safe in New York City." I got to play that
Hmm.
was off of
Yep. Stiff upper lip.
Stiff Upper Lip. So we were
Hmm.
playing stuff off of that, which was so cool.
Oh yeah.
Which is not there isn't to me not a bad album, but anyway, we'll wrap this up. So Let There Be Rock, the story of AC/DC, that can be found wherever books are sold. So that's out there. AC/DC FAQ, all that's left to know about the world's true rock and roll band. That's out there everywhere, right? People can find that.
Yep. Yep. All my books are on Amazon, and you can go
And
to
your
my
website.
website also.
Yeah,
Yep.
SusanMasino.com.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else you want to let fans know about, Susan, before we let you go?
I just, I hope everybody that wants to see them gets to see them. And right now we only have 13 dates in the US, and I'm hoping to see more. So,
Fingers crossed. Yeah. Susan,
Yeah.
thanks so much for coming back on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me.